There is something trying to reach you right now, not metaphorically, not as a poetic way of saying the universe is full of possibility. Right now, in this moment, as you are sitting or lying or standing wherever you are, there is information moving through the field around you, precise, specific, calibrated to exactly where you are in your life. And you have been missing it. Not because it isn't there, because you haven't learned how to look. This is the thing no one says plainly enough. The quantum field is not silent. It is not waiting for you to reach some elevated spiritual state before it begins communicating. It is broadcasting constantly, continuously, with the fidelity that would stun you if you understood what you were actually receiving. The messages are not hidden behind some cosmic paywall. They are not reserved for mystics or monks or people who have meditated for 30 years in a cave. They are moving through you right now, the way radio waves move through a room whether or not the radio is turned on. The question has never been whether the field is sending. The question is whether you have learned to receive. And here's the thing you need to look at directly. The thing that most people in this conversation never quite face. The reason you've been missing the messages is not a spiritual deficiency. It is not a lack of worthiness or elevation or cosmic favor. The reason you've been missing them is far more precise than that and far more correctable. You have been looking in the wrong direction. You have been listening with the wrong instrument. You have been waiting for the field to speak in a language you already understand, when the field has been speaking in a language that requires you to develop a new kind of attention. That new kind of attention is what this transmission is about. So before we go anywhere, I want to ask you to do something uncomfortable. I want you to stop for just a moment and look at the last week of your life, not to evaluate it or judge it or extract lessons from it. Just look at it. Look at the moments that felt like coincidence. Look at the things that kept appearing. A word, a theme, a feeling, a face, with what seemed like unusual frequency. Look at the dreams you had and then dismissed. Look at the thought that surfaced 3 times in a row and then got buried under the noise of your day. Look at the moment of inexplicable knowing that you rationalized away before you could act on it. Look at all of that. And then ask yourself honestly, what if none of that was random? What if every single one of those moments was the field speaking? What if the messages were always there and the only thing missing was your ability to recognize them as messages? Sit with that. Don't rush past what you just saw, because this is where the real investigation begins. Not in the abstract, not in the theoretical. Right here, in the actual texture of your actual life, where the field has been leaving signals that you have been trained to overlook. Let's talk about what the quantum field actually is, because this word gets used so casually that it has almost lost its meaning. When physicists talk about the quantum field, they are not speaking metaphorically. They are describing the most fundamental layer of physical reality. The substrate beneath matter, beneath particles, beneath everything you can see or touch or measure. At the quantum level, reality does not behave the way objects behave. It does not follow the simple rules of classical physics where a thing is here or there, moving at this speed in this direction, predictable and fixed. At the quantum level, reality exists as a field of probability, a superposition of possibilities. Every particle, before it is observed, exists in multiple states simultaneously. It is not in one place. It is smeared across probability space, occupying all of its possible positions at once until the moment of observation collapses that probability wave into a single, specific, measurable event. That's not philosophy. That's quantum mechanics. And what this actually means when you let it land, is that the fundamental nature of reality is not fixed. It is not a rigid structure that you move through like a ball through a maze. It is a living, responsive, probability-dense field that collapses into specific form based on the nature of the observation being made. The observer does not passively witness reality. The observer participates in the creation of what becomes real. This has been demonstrated in laboratory conditions so many times with so many different experimental designs that the debate is not about whether it happens. The debate is about what it means. And here is what it means, stated as plainly as possible. The field responds to observation, not just in physics laboratories, in your life. The quantum field that underlies physical reality is not separate from the field in which your consciousness operates, your awareness, the quality of your attention, the nature of your observation, the frequency at which you are perceiving, is not floating above the quantum field like a ghost above a machine. It is embedded in it. It is participating in it. Every act of genuine attention you bring to your experience is, at the most fundamental level of reality, an act of collapsing possibility into form. And this is precisely why the field can send messages. Because it is not a dead medium, it is a living, participatory system in which information moves not just through physical channels, but through the collapse of quantum probability itself. When the field is communicating with you, when it is sending what we might call a message, it is not violating any law of physics. It is operating through the deepest law of physics, that consciousness and reality are not separate, that observation is creative, that the act of truly seeing something changes what that something is. But here's where most people get stuck. Most people hear this and they think the field is going to communicate in the way they already communicate. In words, in clear directives, in obvious signs that require no interpretation, no developed sensitivity, no new quality of attention. They wait for the burning bush. They wait for the thunderclap. They wait for something so unmistakable that even their most defended, most skeptical, most distracted self couldn't miss it. And while they wait, the field sends 17 messages they don't recognize as messages. Because the field doesn't speak in the language of your thinking mind. It speaks in the language of pattern, resonance, synchronicity, somatic signal, and the precise quality of what captures your attention when your guard is down. Look closer. The field speaks in repetition. When the same theme appears in 3 unrelated contexts in the same week, the same word, the same concept, the same type of person, the same situation, that is not coincidence. Coincidence is a word we use when we haven't yet developed the sensitivity to recognize pattern. What you are actually seeing is the field creating resonance. It is vibrating at a specific frequency and showing you where that frequency is appearing in your reality. The repetition is not accidental. It is the field saying, look here, this is where the probability is collapsing. This is where something is trying to become real. The field speaks in the body, not in vague feelings, but in specific somatic signals that carry precise information if you have learned to read them. The sudden expansion in your chest when you think about a certain direction. The contraction in your gut when you are about to make a decision that moves you away from your actual path. The inexplicable energy that arrives when you engage with a certain idea, a certain person, a certain possibility. The exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep when you are living in a configuration that the field is no longer supporting. These are not random physiological events. These are the field speaking through the only instrument it has direct access to, your body. The field speaks in dreams, not in the obvious symbolic dreams that you remember clearly and feel are significant. In the dreams that dissolve the moment you wake up, leaving only a feeling. In the images that surface in that liminal space between sleep and waking, when your analytical mind has not yet reasserted its dominance and your perception is briefly open to frequencies it normally filters. In the recurring dream, you have dismissed as anxiety or processing. Look at it again. Look closer. What is it showing you that your waking mind has refused to see? The field speaks in synchronicity. This is the one people are most familiar with, but also the one they most consistently misinterpret. Synchronicity is not the universe giving you what you want. It is not a cosmic vending machine where meaningful coincidence equals confirmation that you're on the right track. Synchronicity is the field showing you where probability is dense, where multiple timelines are converging, where something is ready to collapse from possibility into form. The meaningful coincidence is not a reward. It is a coordinate. It is the field saying, here, pay attention here. Something is happening at this intersection, and the field speaks in what you cannot stop thinking about. The idea that keeps returning. The question that won't stay answered. The face that appears in your mind at unexpected moments. The thing you keep almost doing and then pulling back from. These are not obsessions or fixations or signs of a restless mind. These are the field's way of showing you where your energy is being called, where something unresolved is holding probability in suspension, waiting for the quality of attention that would allow it to collapse into clarity. Now watch what happens when you start to look at your life through this lens. Everything changes, not because the field suddenly starts sending different signals, but because you begin to recognize the signals that were always there. The noise resolves into signal, the randomness reveals its pattern, the chaos shows its coherence, and you begin to see that you have been living inside a transmission you never learned to decode. If this transmission is landing for you, if something in it is reaching the place where real signals land, like this video and subscribe to this channel, because every transmission here is designed to take you one layer deeper into this exact kind of seeing. Let me show you something. There was a woman named Mira. She had spent 7 years building a life that looked, from the outside, like everything she was supposed to want. The career, the apartment, the relationship, the schedule that was full enough to prevent the kind of silence in which questions become unavoidable. She was not unhappy in the way that is obvious. She was unhappy in the way that is invisible, the way that hides behind busyness and productivity and the constant reassurance of external validation. She was, in the language of the field, living in a probability collapse that no longer matched her actual frequency. And the field was trying to tell her. It started with a book. She walked past a bookstore window and a title stopped her. She didn't buy it. She told herself she didn't have time. 3 days later, someone left a copy of the same book on the table in the break room at work. She glanced at it, noted the coincidence, and went back to her desk. 2 weeks after that, a stranger on a train was reading it, and when Mira looked up from her phone, it was the first thing she saw. She thought, that's strange, and then she thought about something else. The field shifted frequencies. It started sending through her body, a tiredness that wasn't tiredness, more like a heaviness, a gravity, as if some part of her was being pulled downward by the weight of a life she hadn't consciously chosen. A tightness in her chest every Sunday evening that she had labeled anxiety and managed with wine and television. A sudden, inexplicable lightness. Whenever she did the one thing she had been telling herself was impractical, the painting she did in secret on Sunday mornings before the rest of her life woke up, that she had never shown anyone and never talked about. She noticed the lightness, and then she buried it under practicality. The field shifted frequencies again. It started sending through dreams, not elaborate symbolic dreams she could analyze. Simple, clear images that dissolved when she woke up but left her with a feeling she couldn't name. The feeling of standing in a large, open space with light coming from every direction. The feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. The feeling of a life that was not the life she was living. She would wake up from these dreams and lie in the dark for a few minutes, and something in her would be very still and very clear, and then her alarm would go off and the day would begin, and the feeling would dissolve like smoke. She was receiving messages. She was not reading them. The field is patient. It is not offended by your inattention. It does not stop sending because you have missed the signal 17 times. But it does escalate. When the subtle signals are consistently missed, the field does not give up. It amplifies. It begins to collapse probability in ways that are harder to ignore. The book becomes the conversation you overhear in a coffee shop that stops you mid-step. The body signal becomes the illness that forces you to stop. The dream becomes the waking vision you cannot shake. The synchronicity becomes the series of events so improbable that your rational mind cannot construct a satisfying explanation. For Mira, the escalation came in the form of a restructuring at her company. Her position was eliminated, not because of performance, not because of anything she had done or failed to do. The structure that had been holding her life in its current shape was simply removed. And in the moment when she sat with the news, not the panic that came later, but the very first moment before the thinking mind engaged, there was something else. Something that felt, she would later say, like relief, like a door she had been standing in front of for years had finally opened on its own. She looked at that feeling. She didn't look away from it. And the moment she looked at it clearly, the moment she stopped pretending it wasn't there, everything changed. Not immediately, not without difficulty. But the field, which had been trying to redirect her attention for 3 years, finally had her full observation. An observation at the quantum level collapses probability. The field had been holding a specific configuration of possibility in suspension, waiting for the quality of attention that would allow it to become real. The moment Mira stopped looking away, the probability collapsed. Not into the life she had planned, into the life the field had been trying to show her. And you have been both the one who looks and the one who looks away. But today, you chose to look. So let's get precise about what receiving actually means. Because this is where the conversation usually goes soft, where it retreats into vague spiritual language about opening your heart and trusting the universe. And I'm not going to do that to you. You deserve more precision than that. The field deserves more precision than that. Receiving is a specific skill. It has specific components, and like any skill, it can be developed through specific practice. The first component is what I would call signal discrimination, the ability to distinguish between the noise of your conditioned mind and the signal of the field. This is harder than it sounds because your conditioned mind is very loud and very convincing. It has been running your perception for so long that most people cannot tell the difference between a thought that arises from their conditioned patterns and a signal that arises from the field. They look identical from the inside, they feel similar, they arrive in the same medium, the stream of your awareness, and they dress themselves in the same language, but they have a different quality. And when you develop the sensitivity to feel that quality, you begin to be able to tell them apart. Conditioned thought has a particular texture. It is reactive. It is familiar. It runs in grooves, the same patterns, the same conclusions, the same fears and justifications and rationalizations, cycling through with minor variations. When you observe it closely, you can see its mechanical quality. It is not arising fresh from reality. It is arising from your history, your programming, your accumulated story about who you are and how the world works. It is, in quantum terms, a collapsed probability, something that has already become fixed, that is no longer in the living superposition of the field, but has crystallized into the rigid structure of your personal narrative. Field signal has a different quality. It is fresh. It arrives without the smell of your history on it. It often comes as a knowing rather than a thought, a direct apprehension of something true, without the usual chain of reasoning that leads you to conclusions. It arrives in the body before it arrives in the mind. It is often quiet rather than loud, subtle rather than insistent, and it tends to persist rather than escalate. It doesn't get louder or more anxious the way conditioned thoughts do when you don't act on them. It simply remains present, available, patient. The practice of signal discrimination begins with observation. Not with trying to force a signal, not with creating the conditions you think will make the field speak, but with watching your own mind closely enough to begin to recognize its patterns, to see the grooves it runs in, to feel the mechanical quality of its habitual responses, so that when something genuinely fresh arrives, you recognize it as different. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. Close your eyes if you're able. Take one breath, not a performance of breathing, just one actual breath, in and out. And now, without trying to think about anything in particular, simply watch what arises in your awareness. Watch the thoughts that surface. Don't follow them. Don't engage with them. Just watch them appear. Notice their quality. Notice which ones feel old and familiar, like recordings of something you've thought 1,000 times. Notice which ones feel fresh, unexpected, arriving from a direction you didn't anticipate. Don't evaluate what you observe. Don't try to determine which thoughts are signals and which are noise. Just watch. Just observe the stream of your own awareness with the curiosity of someone who has never seen this particular river before. What do you notice? Most people, when they do this for the first time, are surprised by how mechanical their minds are, how repetitive, how much of what feels like thinking is actually the same handful of patterns cycling through with minor variations. This is not a criticism. This is just what the unobserved mind does. It runs its programs, it executes its patterns, it generates the same outputs from the same inputs over and over, with the conviction that this is thought rather than repetition. But occasionally, in the spaces between the patterns, something else arrives. This is where you learn to look. The second component of receiving is what I would call frequency matching, the capacity to align your own observational frequency with the frequency at which the field is broadcasting. This is where quantum mechanics becomes directly relevant to your daily experience, and I want to be precise about why. At the quantum level, particles interact through resonance. Two quantum systems that share a frequency, that are, in the technical language, entangled, respond to each other instantaneously regardless of the distance between them. This is not science fiction. This is one of the most experimentally verified phenomena in the history of physics. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. The universe calls it entanglement. And what it means practically is that systems that share a frequency are in communication in a way that transcends the ordinary limitations of space and time. Your consciousness is a quantum system. The field is a quantum system. When your observational frequency matches the frequency at which the field is broadcasting a particular signal, you receive it. When it doesn't match, the signal passes through you without being registered. Not because it isn't there, but because the instrument isn't tuned. And here is the key insight. Your observational frequency is not fixed. It is not determined by your personality or your history or your current circumstances. It is determined by the quality of your attention in this moment, right now. The quality of your attention is something you can shift, not by force, not by trying harder, but by the specific act of observation that we're exploring in this transmission. When you are in a state of reactive, conditioned, automatic response, when you are caught in the groove of your patterns, running on autopilot, responding to life rather than observing it, your observational frequency is low, not morally low, informationally low. You are receiving a narrow band of the field's broadcast. You are, in effect, tuned to a single radio station when there are hundreds of stations broadcasting simultaneously. When you shift into the observer state, when you step back from the automatic reaction and become the one who watches rather than the one who responds, your observational frequency expands. You begin to receive a broader band of the field's transmission. The signals that were always there, that were always being sent, begin to resolve out of the noise. The pattern becomes visible, the message becomes legible. This is not mysticism. This is the direct consequence of what quantum mechanics tells us about the relationship between observation and reality. But look closer, because here is where it gets even more precise. The observer state is not a passive state. This is one of the most common misunderstandings about what it means to observe. People hear the word observer and they think detached, uninvolved, watching from a distance with no participation. And they try to cultivate this kind of cold, removed observation, and they wonder why the field doesn't respond. The quantum observer is not detached. The quantum observer is precisely engaged. The act of observation in quantum mechanics is not passive witnessing, it is active participation. It is the event that collapses probability into form. The observer does not stand outside the system and watch it neutrally. The observer is part of the system. The observer's act of looking is what makes the thing being looked at become real in the way that it becomes real. This is the distinction between watching and witnessing. Watching is passive. You can watch a film and remain completely unchanged by it if you are sufficiently defended. Witnessing is something else. Witnessing is the act of bringing your full observational presence to something, not to analyze it, not to judge it, not to fix it, but to see it clearly, completely, without the filter of your conditioned interpretation. And when you witness something in this way, when you bring that quality of full, clear, undefended observation, the thing you are witnessing changes, Not because you forced it to change, because clear observation is itself a transformative force. This is what it means to receive from the field, not to passively wait for messages to arrive, but to bring the quality of full witnessing to your experience, to your body, to your dreams, to the patterns in your life, to the synchronicities, to the things that keep appearing, and to let that quality of observation collapse the probability into clarity. Tell me something in the comments. What did you notice the moment you stopped reacting and actually watched? What became visible when you brought that quality of open observation to something you have been moving past? I want to know what you saw. Let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing. There is a principle in quantum physics called the uncertainty principle. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that you cannot simultaneously know both the precise position and the precise momentum of a quantum particle. The more precisely you measure one, the less precisely you can know the other. This is not a limitation of our measuring instruments. It is a fundamental feature of reality at the quantum level. The act of measuring position disturbs momentum. The act of measuring momentum disturbs position. The observer and the observed are not separate. They are part of the same system, and the act of observation is always an interaction, always a participation, always a co-creation. What this means for receiving messages from the field is this: you cannot receive a field signal by trying to pin it down before you've seen it. You cannot receive a message by deciding in advance what it will say and then looking for confirmation. You cannot receive a signal by observing with such analytical intensity that you disturb the very thing you're trying to see. The uncertainty principle applied to consciousness suggests that there is a quality of open observation, a kind of soft focus, a receptive attention that is engaged but not grasping. That is the optimal state for receiving field signals, not the hard analytical gaze that tries to extract and categorize, not the passive, unfocused drift that misses everything. Something in between. Something like the attention you bring to a piece of music that moves you, where you are fully present and fully open and not trying to understand, but simply to receive. This is the quality of attention the field requires. This is the instrument you need to develop. And here is what no one tells you about observation. The field is not just sending messages about what to do next. The field is sending messages about who you actually are, underneath the construction, underneath the story, underneath the identity you have been maintaining with such effort. The most profound messages from the field are not directives, they are revelations. They are the field showing you the gap between who you have been performing and who you actually are. Between the probability you have been collapsing with your habitual attention and the probability that is available to you when you observe from a different position. This is where the messages get uncomfortable. This is where people stop looking, because the field, in its absolute honesty, shows you not just where to go, but what you have been avoiding seeing. It shows you the relationship that is no longer alive, even though you have been performing its aliveness for years. It shows you the work that drains you, even though you have been telling yourself you're passionate about it. It shows you the version of yourself you have been maintaining for the approval of others, and it shows you, quietly, persistently, through every channel available to it, the version of yourself that is actually true. And most people, when they begin to receive these signals, immediately look for a way to reframe them as something less challenging. They take the message about the relationship and they turn it into a message about communication. They take the message about the work and they turn it into a message about needing a vacation. They take the message about their performed identity and they turn it into a message about self-care. They receive the signal and then immediately translate it into the least disruptive version of itself. This is not receiving, this is editing, and the field knows the difference. Let me tell you about a man named Elias. He had been meditating for 11 years, not casually, seriously, with discipline, with a practice that he maintained with the same commitment that others bring to elite athletic training. He had read the books, he had sat the retreats, he had developed what he believed was a sophisticated understanding of his own mind and a genuine capacity for the observer state. He was, by every external measure, someone who had learned to watch. But there was one thing he would not look at. He had built his entire identity around being the person who had figured it out, the person who had done the work, the person who was beyond the ordinary reactivity and confusion of unconscious life. This identity was precious to him. It was, in fact, the foundation on which everything else rested. His relationships, his work, his sense of purpose, his feeling of safety in the world. He was the one who was awake. And this story, this particular collapse of probability, was the one thing he could not afford to observe clearly. Because to observe it clearly would be to see that it was a story, a construction, a very sophisticated, very spiritually decorated version of the same ego protection that he had been practicing seeing through in everyone else. The field sent messages. It sent them through the people closest to him, who sometimes felt, in moments they never quite articulated, that there was something slightly performed about his equanimity, something slightly defended about his openness, something that felt in the way you feel things before you can name them, like a very tall wall built to look like a very wide horizon. It sent them through his practice itself in the moments when he sat in meditation and felt not the spacious awareness he had been cultivating, but a strange, uncomfortable tightness, a resistance he couldn't locate, a something that wouldn't dissolve no matter how skillfully he observed it. It sent them through a series of interactions with a specific kind of person, people who were genuinely, messily, uncomplicatedly alive, people who hadn't figured it out, people who were still in the middle of the confusion, still reactive, still making mistakes, still fully human in the way that is sometimes beautiful and sometimes painful. When Elias was around these people, something happened that he couldn't quite explain. He felt simultaneously superior and envious, simultaneously certain he had something they needed, and aware that they had something he had lost. He received these signals. He translated them immediately into something he could manage. The tightness in his practice became a sign that he needed to deepen his practice. The feeling around the messy, alive people became a confirmation that his path was the right one. The sense that something in him was defended became material for further refinement. He was editing the field's messages in real time. And then one day, in the middle of an ordinary meditation session, something happened that he could not translate. He was sitting in his usual posture, bringing his usual quality of attention, when a thought arose that was so clear and so direct, and so completely without the usual spiritual packaging that he could not immediately process it. The thought was, "You are performing even this." He sat with it. He tried to observe it the way he had learned to observe thoughts, without identification, without engagement, allowing it to arise and pass. But it didn't pass. It remained quiet, precise, patient, the way field signals remain when they are carrying something essential. He looked at it, and the moment he looked at it, really looked at it without immediately reaching for a framework to contain it, he saw what was behind it. He saw the construction, not with shame or self-judgment, but with the kind of clear, clean seeing that is the actual observer state, as opposed to the performed version of it he had been maintaining. He saw the whole architecture of his identity, the years of practice, the accumulated wisdom, the spiritual vocabulary, the carefully cultivated equanimity. And he saw that it was, at its foundation, a way of not having to be vulnerable, a way of not having to be uncertain, a way of being permanently above the mess of ordinary human experience while calling it awakening. And in that moment of clear seeing, the construction did not collapse into crisis. It collapsed into something far more interesting. It collapsed into the living, uncertain, genuinely open quality that he had been performing for 11 years. The field had been sending this message for a long time. The moment he stopped looking away, it landed. Now watch what happens in your own experience when you hear this, because I want you to look at something. I want you to look at the thing you have been translating, the signal you have been receiving and immediately converting into the least disruptive version of itself, the message from the field that you have been editing before it can fully land. You know what it is. You don't need me to name it. It has been arriving in your life through multiple channels, Fab. Through your body, through your relationships, through the patterns that keep repeating, through the dreams that leave a feeling behind even when the content dissolves. It has been arriving with the quiet persistence that field signals have, and you have been receiving it and then immediately reaching for the interpretation that requires the least change. Look at that. Look at the editing process itself, not at the message, at the way you have been intercepting the message before it can fully reach you. What do you notice? This is where the real practice begins, not in the development of some exotic spiritual sensitivity, in the willingness to stop editing, to receive the signal as it actually arrives, not as you need it to arrive. To let the field speak in its own language rather than immediately translating it into yours. Let's talk about the specific mechanics of how this works, because I want to give you something you can actually use. The field communicates through what we might call quantum coherence, a state in which multiple quantum systems are aligned in phase, vibrating together, sharing information through their resonance rather than through physical contact. In biological systems, quantum coherence has been observed in processes like photosynthesis, where energy is transferred through a leaf with an efficiency that classical physics cannot explain. The efficiency comes from the quantum coherence of the system, the way the particles involved are not behaving as isolated units, but as a coherent field, sharing information instantaneously across the system. Your nervous system is capable of quantum coherence. This is not speculation. Research in quantum biology has identified coherent quantum processes in neural microtubules, in the ion channels of cell membranes, in the very architecture of biological information processing. Your brain is not just a classical computer running electrochemical signals. It is a quantum system capable of coherent states in which information is processed in ways that transcend ordinary linear causality. And in those coherent states, in the moments when your nervous system is in a condition of quantum coherence rather than classical noise, your capacity to receive field signals is dramatically enhanced. Not because you have become more spiritual, because you have become more coherent, more aligned, more capable of the kind of resonant reception that field communication requires. The question is, what produces quantum coherence in your nervous system? The research points in a consistent direction. Coherence is produced by states of calm, focused attention. the kind of attention that is engaged but not stressed, present but not grasping. It is produced by the specific quality of awareness that arises when you are neither lost in thought nor struggling to suppress thought, but simply observing the stream of your experience with clear, open, undefended attention. It is produced, in other words, by exactly the observer state we have been exploring, and it is disrupted by stress, by reactivity, by the constant noise of conditioned mental activity, by the state of chronic low-grade vigilance that most people in modern life maintain as their baseline. When your nervous system is in this state, which is the default state for most people most of the time, its capacity for quantum coherence is suppressed. The noise-to-signal ratio is too high. The field is broadcasting, but the instrument cannot resolve the signal from the noise. This is why the observer state is not just a spiritual practice, it is a physiological prerequisite for receiving. When you shift into the observer state, when you step back from the reactive, conditioned, automatic mode and bring the quality of clear, open witnessing to your experience, you are literally changing the physical state of your nervous system in a way that increases its quantum coherence and therefore its capacity to receive field signals. That's not belief, that's quantum mechanics. So let's do this now. Let's actually practice it. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise, this is an observation. Wherever you are, allow your body to settle, not to relax in the way that means going limp or disengaged, to settle in the way that means becoming fully present in your physical form. Feel the weight of your body. Feel the contact between your body and whatever surface is supporting it. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. Feel the rhythm of your breathing. Not controlling it, just feeling it. Now, without closing your eyes if that's not available to you, allow your gaze to soften, not to unfocus, to expand. Let your visual field widen so that you are taking in the full periphery of what's in front of you, not just the narrow center of your focused attention. This is a literal shift in your visual processing from foveal to peripheral vision, and it has a direct physiological effect. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reduces stress hormones, and shifts your brain from the high-frequency beta waves of reactive thought toward the lower-frequency alpha waves associated with relaxed, open attention. In this state, this wide, soft, present, open state, simply observe. Observe your thoughts without following them. Observe your feelings without amplifying them. Observe your body without trying to change anything about it. Be the witness of your own experience, not the participant in it. And now, from this place of open observation, ask a single question. Not to your thinking mind, to the field. Ask it the way you would ask a question you genuinely don't know the answer to, with real openness, with real willingness to receive whatever comes. The question is, what have you been trying to show me? Don't reach for an answer, don't construct one. Just hold the question in the open field of your awareness and observe what arises, what image comes. What feeling surfaces, what knowing arrives without the usual chain of reasoning, what you notice in your body that you hadn't noticed before. This is reception. This is the instrument turned on and tuned. Whatever arose, however small, however unexpected, however different from what you anticipated, that is the beginning of your translation. That is the field responding to the quality of your observation, not with a complete answer, with a direction, a frequency, a coordinate. Stay with it. Don't rush past what you just saw. Now let's go deeper into the specific types of messages the field sends, because there is a taxonomy here that is worth understanding. Not every signal is the same kind of signal. Not every message is asking the same thing of you. The first type of message is what I would call a course correction signal. This is the field showing you that the probability you have been collapsing, the reality you have been creating through the quality of your habitual attention, is moving away from your actual alignment. These signals tend to be felt as friction, as the sense that something isn't working the way it should, as the repeated appearance of the same obstacle in different forms, as the exhaustion of pushing against something that won't yield, as the relationship that keeps having the same argument, as the project that keeps stalling at the same point, as the pattern that keeps repeating despite your best efforts to change it. Most people experience these signals as problems to be solved. They bring their analytical, problem-solving mind to the friction and try to find the tactical fix. And sometimes there is a tactical fix and the friction resolves. But often, far more often than people recognize, the friction is not a problem to be solved. It is a signal to be read. It is the field showing you that the direction you are moving in is not the direction your actual frequency is calling you toward. The friction is not an obstacle on your path. It is a message about the path itself. When you bring the observer state to this kind of signal, when you stop trying to push through it or solve it and simply observe it with clear, open attention, what often becomes visible is not a better strategy for the same direction, but a completely different direction. One that doesn't feel like friction at all. One that feels, in fact, like the absence of friction, like movement that is aligned rather than forced. The second type of message is what I would call an expansion signal. This is the field showing you that a new probability is available. That something that was previously in the superposition of possibility is ready to collapse into form, if you bring the quality of observation that would allow it to. These signals tend to be felt as inexplicable excitement, as the sudden appearance of an idea that feels both new and deeply familiar, as the encounter with a person or a concept or an opportunity that seems to arrive from outside your usual probability field. As the dream that leaves you with the feeling of a life larger than the one you are living, as the thought that keeps returning with a quality of aliveness that your conditioned thoughts don't have. These signals are often missed because they don't fit the existing structure of your life. They arrive pointing at something that requires a reorganization of what you have. They carry the implicit message that what is available is larger than what you have been allowing yourself to receive. And because they threaten the existing structure, because they require the willingness to let the current configuration dissolve in order to allow a new one to emerge, most people dismiss them as fantasy or wishful thinking or impracticality. But look at them again. Look at them with the observer state. Look at the quality of aliveness they carry. Look at the persistence with which they return. Look at the way they feel in your body. Not the anxious excitement of ego desire, but the quiet, grounded expansion of something that is actually true. That quality is the field's signature. That is how you know it is a signal rather than a fantasy. The third type of message is what I would call an identity signal. This is the most challenging type and the one that is most consistently avoided. This is the field showing you the gap between who you have been performing and who you actually are, between the identity you have constructed and maintained and the frequency you are actually operating at. between the story you have been telling about yourself and the truth that the story has been covering. These signals arrive through the things that trigger you most intensely, through the relationships that bring up the most charge, through the situations that activate your deepest defenses, through the dreams that disturb you most, through the thoughts you are most reluctant to admit having, through the feelings you are most skilled at suppressing. The identity signal is the field saying, "Look here. This is where the construction is. This is where you are collapsing probability, based on a story rather than based on your actual frequency. And when you look, when you bring the full quality of the observer state to this specific place, the construction becomes visible, not as a failure, not as evidence of how broken you are, as a construction, as something that was built, that served a purpose that can now be seen clearly enough to be released. This is the message that transforms the most when you look at it directly. And this is the one that requires the most courage to receive. Let's go even deeper, because there is a question underneath all of this that I want to address directly. The question that is probably running somewhere in the background of your experience as you listen to this. The question that your analytical mind is either asking loudly or trying to suppress. How do I know the difference between a genuine field signal and my own projection? How do I know I'm not just finding patterns in randomness because I want them to be there? How do I know I'm receiving rather than constructing? This is a legitimate question. It is, in fact, the most important question you can ask, and the answer is not the one most people expect. The answer is you develop the capacity to feel the difference, not through a set of rules you can apply analytically, through the development of a specific quality of inner discernment that comes from sustained practice of the observer state. But there are some markers that are worth knowing. Field signals tend to have a quality of freshness. They arrive from outside your usual thought patterns, often surprising you with their content or direction. They tend to be persistent without being anxious. They don't escalate or become more insistent the way fearful thoughts do. But they return with a quiet consistency that is different from obsession. They tend to be felt in the body before they are heard in the mind. They arrive as a somatic knowing before they resolve into conceptual clarity. And they tend to expand rather than contract. When you follow a genuine field signal, the quality of your experience tends to open rather than close, even when the direction being pointed at is challenging. Projection, by contrast, tends to feel familiar. It tends to confirm what you already believe. It tends to be driven by desire or fear, rather than by the neutral quality of clear information. It tends to be constructed. You can feel the effort of the construction if you observe it carefully. And it tends to contract when you follow it, rather than expand. There is often a quality of tightness or grasping in the following of a projection that is absent from the following of a genuine signal. But here is the deepest answer to the question. The more you practice the observer state, the more clearly you can feel the difference. The capacity for signal discrimination is not something you have or don't have. It is something you develop through sustained, honest, unflinching observation of your own experience. Through the willingness to look at your projections clearly enough to see them as projections. Through the courage to receive signals that don't confirm what you already believe. This is the practice, not the exotic spiritual practice of reaching for higher states. The ordinary, demanding, daily practice of watching your own experience with genuine honesty and genuine openness. Now let's talk about what happens in your life when you begin to consistently receive and act on field signals. Because this is where the conversation gets very practical, and I want to be precise about what you can actually expect. The first thing that happens is not the arrival of wonderful new circumstances. The first thing that happens is that your existing circumstances become more legible. The patterns become visible. The signals that were always there resolve out of the noise. And often, what becomes visible first is not the wonderful new direction, but the thing that has been running your reality from below the level of your awareness. The belief, the story, the pattern, the identity construction that has been shaping your probability collapses without your conscious knowledge. This can feel initially like things are getting worse, like the observation is revealing problems rather than solutions, like the field is showing you what's not working rather than what could work. This is not the field punishing you for finally paying attention. This is the natural sequence of genuine seeing. You have to see what has been running before you can see what is available. You have to observe the current configuration clearly before the new configuration can emerge. The revelation of what has been hidden is not the problem, it is the prerequisite for the solution. And this is where most people stop. They begin to receive clearly, they see something uncomfortable, and they retreat back into the noise. They decide that the observation is the problem rather than the solution. They choose the comfort of not seeing over the discomfort of seeing clearly. Don't do that. Not now, not when you have come this far. Because here is what happens when you stay with the clear seeing, when you hold the observer state through the discomfort of what the observation reveals. Reality reorganizes, not dramatically, not all at once, not in the cinematic way that would be satisfying, but would also be too easy. It reorganizes the way a quantum probability field reorganizes when the observation changes. It begins to collapse into different configurations. The patterns that were running begin to lose their grip because the grip of an unconscious pattern depends on its invisibility. The moment you see it clearly, the moment you observe it without flinching, it begins to dissolve, not because you fought it or fixed it or transcended it, because clear observation is itself the transformative force. What you watch, you change. What you avoid controls you. Let me give you the third observer practice, the deepest one we'll do in this transmission. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to think about the area of your life where you feel the most stuck. Not the area that is most obviously troubled, the area where you feel the most stuck. Where the same patterns keep repeating, where the same obstacles keep appearing, where your best efforts seem to produce the same results, where you have tried and the situation has not changed in the way you need it to change. Look at that area. Don't try to solve it. Don't reach for a new strategy. Just look at it. Now, from the observer state, from the position of the one who watches clearly, I want you to ask yourself a question, not to analyze, to observe. The question is, what am I not willing to see about this situation? Not what don't I know? What am I not willing to see because there is a difference? What you don't know is information you haven't encountered yet. What you're not willing to see is information that is already available to you, that the field has already sent through multiple channels with persistent consistency, that you have been editing before it can fully land. Stay with that question. Let it settle into the area of stuckness like a light being turned on in a dark room. Don't force an answer. Don't construct one. Simply observe what becomes visible when the question is asked from a place of genuine willingness to see. What do you notice? Whatever just arose, however uncomfortable, however much it challenges your current story, however much it asks of you, that is the message. That is what the field has been trying to show you. That is the signal that has been arriving through your body, through your dreams, through the repetition of patterns, through the synchronicities you've been dismissing, through the friction you've been trying to push through. Now look at it. Don't look away. And notice what happens when you look at it directly. Notice whether the stuckness shifts even slightly. Notice whether something that felt fixed begins to feel, even fractionally, more fluid. Notice whether the quality of the situation changes when you bring the full quality of your observation to it. This is the observer effect in action. This is the quantum field responding to the quality of your attention. This is not magic. This is the most fundamental principle of reality at the quantum level. What you observe, you change. What illusion about yourself or your situation just fell apart under that direct observation? What pattern did you finally watch long enough to understand? Leave it in the comments, plainly, without softening it. Because when you name it in a field of other observers, it loses another layer of its grip. Let me address something that I know is present in the experience of some of you who are listening to this. The question of why. Why does the field bother? Why does it send messages? Why does it care about the direction of your life or the quality of your attention or the gap between who you are performing and who you actually are? This question assumes that the field is separate from you, that it is a system outside your consciousness that has chosen to communicate with you the way one entity communicates with another. But this is not quite accurate. The field is not sending messages to you from the outside. The field is the medium in which your consciousness exists, and the messages are arising from the deepest layer of what you are. In quantum field theory, there is no sharp boundary between a quantum system and its environment. The system and the environment are in constant interaction, constantly exchanging information, constantly influencing each other's states. The distinction between inside and outside is a feature of classical physics that dissolves at the quantum level. At the quantum level, everything is entangled with everything else. The boundary between your consciousness and the field is not a wall, it is a gradient. A region of increasing entanglement, a place where the distinction between observer and observed becomes increasingly unclear. What this means is that the field's messages are not coming from somewhere else. They are arising from the deeper layers of what you are, from the quantum substrate of your own consciousness, from the part of you that is not the constructed identity but the actual frequency, from the intelligence that is not your thinking mind, but is the ground in which your thinking mind operates. The field is not a separate being trying to reach you. The field is what you are at the deepest level, trying to make itself known to the surface of your awareness. The messages are not external communications. They are the deeper intelligence of your own nature trying to inform the surface layer of your experience, trying to show the constructed self what the actual self already knows. This is why the messages feel both external and intimate, both surprising and deeply familiar, both new information and something you already knew, because they are. They are arising from a layer of your own being that is deeper than your constructed identity, and they carry the quality of both otherness and recognition that characterizes all genuine self-knowledge, and this is why looking away from them is so costly. When you refuse to receive the field's messages, when you edit them, dismiss them, translate them into something less challenging, you are not just missing external information. You are cutting yourself off from the deeper intelligence of your own nature. You are maintaining the constructed self's dominance over the actual self. You are choosing the comfort of the familiar collapse over the aliveness of genuine possibility. This is what it costs to not receive, and this is what becomes available when you do. Let's talk about the practical integration of everything we've covered, because I want you to leave this transmission with something you can actually work with in the texture of your daily life. The practice of receiving field signals is not something you do in special circumstances or dedicated meditation sessions only. It is something you develop as a continuous quality of attention, a background awareness that is always slightly open, always slightly receptive, always maintaining the observer state even in the middle of ordinary activity. The way you develop this is through what I would call micro practices of observation. Brief, specific moments throughout your day when you deliberately shift from automatic, reactive mode into the observer state and ask, what am I noticing right now that I haven't been noticing? What signal is present in this moment that I've been filtering out? In the morning, before the day's agenda takes over, spend 3 minutes in the observer state, not meditating in the formal sense, simply observing. What is the quality of your energy? What thoughts are already present before you've engaged with anything external? What does your body feel like? What is the emotional tone of the morning? Observe all of this without immediately interpreting it or planning around it. Just receive it as information. During the day, when you notice friction, when something isn't working, when a situation is producing the familiar feeling of pushing against something that won't yield, pause. Shift into the observer state. What is this friction showing me? Not how do I push through it? What is it showing me? When something captures your attention unexpectedly, when your eye is drawn to something, when a thought arrives that doesn't feel like your usual thinking, when a feeling arises that doesn't fit the current context, pause. Notice it. Don't immediately analyze it or explain it away. Receive it as potentially significant. Hold it with curiosity rather than certainty. Let it be information without immediately deciding what it means. In the evening before sleep, spend a few minutes reviewing the day through the lens of signal. What appeared with unusual frequency? What felt alive in a way that was different from the ordinary? What moments of friction were actually pointing at something? What synchronicities appeared? What did your body try to tell you that your mind overrode? What signal did you receive and then immediately edit? This transmission touches the surface of a complete system for developing this capacity. And if you want to go deeper into the full framework for signal discrimination, frequency matching, and sustained observer practice, the Quantum Watcher program contains the complete methodology that this video can only point toward. Everything we've explored here about receiving, coherence, and identity signals is developed in full precision there. You can find it at the link in the description. This is not a complicated practice. It is a consistent one. And consistency is what builds the capacity for reception, not the intensity of any single session. The sustained, daily, honest practice of bringing the observer state to your actual experience. There is a community of people who are doing this work. who are developing this capacity, who have chosen the discomfort of clear seeing over the comfort of looking away, who are learning to receive the field's messages and to act on them with the kind of grounded courage that comes from genuine observation rather than wishful thinking. If you have been watching this transmission all the way to this point, you are one of them. Not because watching makes you special, because the fact that you're still here means you're willing to look. And that is genuinely rare. I want to ask you to do something. In the comments below this video, I want you to share one thing, not a summary of what you learned. One specific thing. One moment, one pattern, one signal that you have been editing before it could fully land. One message from the field that you have been receiving and translating into something less challenging than what it actually is. Write it plainly, without spiritual packaging, without softening it into something comfortable. Just, this is what the field has been trying to show me that I have been refusing to fully see, and then read what others have written. Because there is something that happens in a field of observers, a coherence, a resonance, a quality of shared seeing that amplifies the clarity for everyone. When you see that others are receiving similar signals, it becomes harder to dismiss your own. When you see that the patterns you thought were uniquely yours are actually universal, the shame or confusion that made them hard to look at dissolves. The field of observers is itself a quantum system. Its coherence is greater than the sum of its parts. Type this in the comments if you're ready to receive "I see it now," and it can't unsee itself. Let me give you the integration principle that ties everything in this transmission together, because there is a single insight at the center of all of this, and I want to state it as clearly as possible before we close. The quantum field is not sending you messages about your circumstances. It is sending you messages about your observation. It is showing you where your attention has been, how the quality of your observation has been shaping what collapses into form in your life, and what would become available if you brought a different quality of attention to the same reality. The messages are not about what to do, they are about how to see. And when you learn to see differently, when you shift from the reactive, automatic, conditioned observation of the unexamined life to the clear, open, honest observation of the witness, the reality you are observing changes, not because you have forced it to change, not because you have manifested or attracted or created in the way that popular spiritual culture describes, but because the quality of your observation is itself the creative force. Because what you watch at the most fundamental level of reality, you change. This is the observer effect, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual concept, as the actual operating principle of the universe you are living in. And the most powerful thing you can do with this understanding is not to use it as a tool for getting what you want. It is to use it as a practice of seeing clearly, of receiving honestly, of looking at what you have been avoiding long enough and with enough clarity that it transforms in the light of your attention. Because that transformation, the transformation that comes from clear seeing rather than from forcing or fixing or manifesting, is the only transformation that lasts. It is the only transformation that is real. Everything else is rearranging furniture in a house that is built on a foundation you haven't examined. But when you examine the foundation, when you bring the full quality of your observation to the deepest layer of what has been running your reality, the whole structure reorganizes, not into rubble, into something more real than what you were holding together with the effort of not looking. You have been receiving signals your entire life. The field has never stopped broadcasting. The messages have been arriving through every channel available, through your body, through your dreams, through the patterns of your experience, through the synchronicities you've been dismissing, through the friction you've been trying to push through the people who have appeared in your life at precisely the moment when their presence carried information you needed. You have not been failing to receive. You have been receiving and editing, receiving and translating, receiving and filing under the category of coincidence or anxiety or wishful thinking. The invitation of this transmission is to stop editing, to receive the signal as it actually arrives, to bring the full quality of the observer state to your experience. Not occasionally, not in special circumstances, but as a continuous quality of attention that you develop through daily practice. And to trust what you see when you look clearly, not blindly, not without discernment, but with the kind of grounded confidence that comes from having developed the capacity to feel the difference between a genuine signal and a projection, between the field speaking and your conditioned mind speaking, between what is actually true and what you need to be true. This is the work. It is not glamorous. It is not dramatic. It does not require you to reach some elevated spiritual state or to have some extraordinary experience. It requires only this: the willingness to look, the courage to receive, the honesty to stop editing, and the recognition, which is the deepest message this transmission has been carrying from the beginning, that the moment you truly see what has been running your reality, it loses its power over you. Not because you defeated it, because you saw it, because clear seeing is the only force that transforms without resistance, because the observer is the most powerful position in the universe. Not because it controls, but because it sees clearly. And clarity, genuine, unflinching, honest clarity, is the only thing reality cannot resist. You are not here to fix your life. You are here to watch it transform the moment you stop looking away. The field has been trying to reach you, not because you are special in the way that flatters the ego, because you are the observer, because your attention is the creative force through which possibility becomes real, because the quality of your seeing is the quality of your reality. And now you are looking, really looking, with the kind of clear, open, honest attention that the field has been waiting for. Watch what happens next, not with anticipation, not with the grasping quality of someone who expects a reward for finally paying attention, with the open, receptive, genuinely curious attention of someone who has learned to receive. Because the field is still broadcasting, it has not stopped. It will not stop. And now, right now in this moment, you have developed enough of the observer state to begin to hear it clearly. What you watch, you change. What you avoid controls you. You were never meant to look away. The observer is the most powerful position in the universe. And now you see. What has been seen cannot be unseen. If this transmission reached you, if something in it landed in the place where the real signals land, below the thinking mind, in the body, in the quiet knowing that precedes language, then stay. Subscribe to this channel not as a passive audience member, as an observer, as someone who has chosen to develop the capacity for clear seeing and who wants to keep going deeper. Every transmission on this channel is an invitation to look at something more precisely, to receive more honestly, to develop the observer state further. When the noise of the day has settled, or the next time you feel yourself reacting instead of watching, come back to this transmission. Let it land in a different layer than it landed today. And if you know someone who is already receiving signals they don't yet have language for, someone who is standing at the edge of something they haven't let themselves fully look at yet, send them this. Because when you give someone else permission to look, you amplify the clarity for both of you. Two observers seeing the same thing creates a coherence that neither could reach alone. That is not a small gift. That is a field event. Now go. Observe, receive, and do not look away from what you see.